Ladies and gentlemen, in case you were wondering what a cake reader looks like, you're looking at one. I have the privilege and the honor of reading the cake every year. In fact, it reminds me of that sequence in the Popeye cartoons. You may remember, those of you who like to follow Popeye, every year Popeye goes out on the golf course, and he doesn't do much. He bangs away at the ball and offers some philosophy as he goes around the course, and usually somewhere in the series of cartoons he says, "Once a year I plays golf, once a year is enough." And I feel very much like Popeye. Once a year I read a cake, and believe me, once a year is enough for that. The idea behind reading cakes is to look at all of these symbols that are on the cake. You'll be able to see them later. I hope that when the dinner is broken up, you'll have a chance to come up and look at this exquisite masterpiece. You're going to eat that cake too. That's not just cardboard. That's the real thing. And it's beautifully decorated, but it has all kinds of symbols on it. And my task is to interpret or read those symbols to you and tell you the story of the man whom we have come to honor this evening. The most predominant thing about the name Ezra Taft Benson, or the thing that catches many people's eye, is the name Taft. And we are reminded, Elder Benson, that your Taft lineage goes back to Mendon, Massachusetts, and makes you a cousin to William Howard Taft, who was, of course, the President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and also related to his son, the late Senator Robert A. Taft. In due time, you were to be affectionately called T by the members of your family. On August 4, 1899, you were ushered into this life on a prayer when the attending doctor despaired of your life, and your father and your grandparents knelt to ask the Lord's help to spare you and your mother. You were named after your great-grandfather, Ezra Taft Benson, who was with the first company of Mormon pioneers to enter the Salt Lake Valley, and who was the first apostle selected by Brigham Young when he became the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The setting of the farm on the cake is to remind us that you were born in a farm and in a home built by your father in the small agricultural community of Whitney, Idaho. Of course, you were capable of driving a team of horses and riding them to herd cattle at the age of 4. And you took great pride in the skill of grooming a horse, and you have remarked often that you would still rather drive a team of horses than an automobile. On the cake there's a mailbox, and that reminds us of a certain incident that happened when you were the eldest child in a family that would eventually include 5 brothers and 5 sisters. Your responsibilities on the farm increased considerably when one day your father received a letter. You said it was the first time that you had ever seen your father and your mother both crying with mixed emotions, happiness and great apprehension. They divulged the contents of the letter to you. Your father had been honored with a call to serve the church for a period in full-time missionary service, which would mean that he would have to be separated from his family during that time. To help pay the expenses of the mission, part of the 40-acre farm was sold, and the children took on additional duties to help out. Through religious faith and family cooperation, in due time, all 6 boys would serve as missionaries. The Boy Scout on the cake reminds us that you loved to work with the youth and that you were extremely active in the Scout movement. And it reminds us that one of your greatest thrills as a young Scoutmaster was to lead your chorus of 24 Scouts to win first place in a church singing contest. Before one camping trip, we're told, you took your Scouts to a barber shop after they had voted to have their hair cut rather close. When the barber dared you and offered to shave your whole head for nothing if you'd go through with it, your Scotch blood rose to the challenge and the dare, and you left that barber shop as bald as a billiard ball. Which, of course, proves that you had a natural inclination for fun and a wholesome prank once in a while, and you were known as a tease when you were young. It says here, when you were young. I understand you still are known as a tease. The old-time car on the cake reminds us that one day, while standing on the sidewalk in the small town of Logan, Utah, you saw the attractive daughter of a local wealthy merchant drive by in her own car. You turned to a friend, it's reported, and you said that you would someday marry that girl. Of course, your friend turned to you and said that you wouldn't even be able to get a date with her because she was so popular. She was the vice president of the college student body, but in time, the farm boy got the date with Flora Emerson, the city girl. But near the time that you were getting serious about this girl, the church called you to Great Britain as a missionary. You encouraged Flora to date other boys while you were gone, and said that if she were the right one for you, things would work out. When you returned from your mission and began to renew your courtship, the church called her as a missionary to Hawaii. She followed the same pattern by encouraging you to date other girls. Well, she was gone, and she said that if things were right between you, they would work out in time also. Well, you pursued your education in her absence. You were elected the most popular man at Brigham Young University, which means you probably did take her advice. And when she finally did return, apparently things did work out, for you were married in the Salt Lake Temple on September 10, 1926. The tent on the cake reminds us that you left on your honeymoon with your belongings in a second-hand Ford pickup truck, sleeping at night in a leaky tent as you headed toward Ames, Iowa, where you had a $70 a month scholarship at the State Agricultural College. After obtaining your master's degree there, you headed back to a farm, or to the family farm in Idaho. You were asked to serve as a county agriculture agent and then as an extension economist and marketing specialist at the state capitol in Boise. You assisted in organizing the Idaho Cooperative Council and helped to make the Idaho potato famous. Now, on the cake, there is a glass, a milky glass, and that reminds us somewhat of your determination to do what you thought was right despite pressures and inclinations in the other direction. This was to make you a marked man later in life, but it was also reflected in some events in your earlier years. For instance, you came to find out that buttermilk was a very healthy drink, but you detested it, which was understandable to some of us. Yet, unlike most of us, you were determined that you were going to develop a liking for it. So in your travels, in restaurants, you persisted in ordering buttermilk as a beverage. To begin with, you could hardly take a sip without gagging, but gradually your swallows increased until finally you were able to drink a whole glass at one sitting and still smiled. Now, of course, you've developed a liking for it. And that is alleged to be the origin of the old adage, "I can't believe I drank the whole thing." On the cake, there are some boxes of sun-made raisins. That reminds us that by 1939, you were in Washington, D.C. as the executive secretary of the National Council of Farmers Cooperatives that represented over 2 million farmers through various farmer-owned and farmer-controlled cooperatives, such as sun-made raisins, sun-kissed oranges, Calavo avocados, and many more. It was at this time that you came to a better realization of the influence of certain subversives in our government, when you tried to warn the Secretary of Agriculture regarding one of his employees. The cabinet member responded by saying he couldn't do anything about it because that man was closer to the ear of the President of the United States than he was. That man, as time proved, was a member of the first known communist cell in our government, which had been established in the Department of Agriculture. On the cake there is a church, and that reminds us that along with your service to agriculture, you gave voluntary time to the church and were appointed to direct its activities in the nation's capital and the surrounding areas as the Washington Stake President, as you had previously done as the Boise Stake President. Then in 1943, there came a great honor and challenge, as you were named the youngest member of the quorum of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and asked to serve full-time in that capacity the rest of your life. On the cake there is a railroad train, and that reminds us that one of the first major assignments in this new calling was to serve as European Mission President immediately at the close of the war. In the 1930s, when the government was encouraging the burning of wheat fields and dumping of milk, the Mormons said that this was immoral and launched their famous and far-sighted welfare program that included storage of supplies. At the close of the war, Americans were using ration books, and Europe was on its back with starvation, poverty, and devastation. Yet the Mormons were able to provide for their own and others in Europe, as under your direction, railway carload shipments of church welfare foodstuffs, bedding, and clothing were supplied to them. Sleeping in bombed-out buildings, breaking through government red tape, traveling some 60,000 miles in 10 months through Germany, Austria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Holland, Norway, Belgium, and other countries, your efforts helped save many lives. Now, there is a red automobile on that cake, too. There's a story behind that. In 1952, you were asked by President-elect Eisenhower, a man you had never met before, to be Secretary of Agriculture in his administration. You didn't want the job, and you gave several good reasons why you should not serve. But you had consulted with the leadership of the church, and when you were assured, among other things, that you wouldn't be asked to support policies which you didn't believe in, only then did you accept the post. Shortly thereafter, during one of your family home meetings, the family decided to buy a new car for the trip back to Washington. When the choice of the color came, there were 2 points of view. You felt that black was more in keeping with the dignity of the office and your natural conservatism. But the younger members wanted red. In any case, you decided to bring it to a vote, which I might say was your first mistake. Because, of course, you lost. And when one of your friends heard about it later, he even sent you a pair of red suspenders to wear during the trip. On the cake, there's a desk and a chair to remind us that your record as Secretary of Agriculture is quite well known. Beneath one of the Time magazine cover portraits of you, you were quoted as saying that no real American wants to be subsidized. The title of one of your books on agriculture, Freedom to Farm, is a clue to your philosophy. And you bothered the bureaucrats and heartened the farmers when you made the statement that the farms of America cannot be run from a desk in Washington. On the cake, there is a calendar. And this reminds us that one night your daughter Bonnie's class of the church's Young People's Association sponsored a scavenger hunt contest with the girls and their dads as partners. I imagine there were some startled people in the Washington, D.C. area that night as they answered their doors and found a member of the president's cabinet and his daughter asking for an old sock or last year's calendar. Despite sitting on what was called the hot seat in Washington as Secretary of Agriculture, you stayed close to your family. On the cake, of course, there is a home, a house. That reminds us that in 1949, you spoke to a nationwide CBS audience on the topic, "Our homes are divinely ordained." You said then that if our nation is to endure, the home must be safeguarded, strengthened, and restored to its rightful importance. You have felt that no other success can compensate for failure in the home, and you therefore believe in family prayer, family projects, and play. You have been blessed with a faithful and devoted companion who puts her church and family first. Your 2 sons and 4 daughters have given you 27 grandchildren. That is at least as of 9:45 p.m. And finally, the American flag on the cake reminds us that since leaving Washington, your name has appeared on an increasing number of patriotic books and endeavors. Some of the book titles are The Red Carpet, An Enemy Hath Done This, and The Title of Liberty. Members of your family have supported you in your defense of freedom, and all of them wished they could have been here tonight. Beth and Bonnie could not make it, however, and Mark is serving on a mission. But 4 of them, all members of the John Birch Society, are here tonight. Your wife, your daughters, Barbara and Beverly, and your son, Reed. Your film, Stand Up for Freedom, has inspired thousands, and we are grateful for the courageous speeches which you have given and are giving. Your influence for good around the world epitomizes the very things we honor at this rally: God, family, and country. And for that, we pay you heartfelt tribute tonight, Elder Benson.